That's what this next half of this episode is about, is what we should eat when we are eating. And maybe the best way to start this really, though, is to talk about what definitely shouldn't be, or not definitely shouldn't. There should be a lot less of on that plate.
Right. Well, the big killer is sugar.
Yeah.
Glucose, particularly fructose, is also pernicious. And if you give animals lots of glucose, and especially fructose, they will get fatty liver disease, they'll get diabetes. It's really bad.
And this one is like absolutely not controversial, right? Like we're going to talk about meat later and people are going to be like really up in arms. But if you say like the big killer is sugar, there's not like a group of people that's going to come hunt us down. Like sugar is bad.
It is. And
why?
Well, why? Well, there are two reasons that glucose is bad when it spikes. Three if you include the brain fog, but let's just talk about physiology here. One is that you're going to have glucose attached to proteins that makes them glom up. Think of it like caramelized body parts. This will ultimately lower your longevity, reduce your longevity, give you type 2 diabetes and probably cardiovascular disease on top of that. So that's one, keep those glucose levels down. But also what glucose is going to be doing to you at high levels is shutting off those protective mechanisms. Remember, particularly AMPK and the sirtuins, they get switched off by sugar. So by having that up for most of the day, if you're eating 3 meals plus snacks, your defenses against disease and aging are going to be working at a minimum. So instead, keep those glucose levels low and consistent. You won't get the brain fog. You'll get fewer proteins modified that'll lead to disease. And thirdly, importantly, you'll actually stimulate your body's natural defenses against disease and aging.
So sort of like the first step, sugars. Let's get rid of the sugars.
Yeah, on that note, by the way, I gave up dessert at age 40, though occasionally I steal it, and it doesn't count if you steal it, right?
No, I think there's like a special little pocket it goes into that doesn't count against
it's invisible.
any of your, right. Inside Tracker doesn't pick it up.
Right. Well, here's the point. You can quit something, but you don't have to be draconian about it. I still like to steal a few scoops of ice cream if I see it, but I'm not going to eat a giant bowl of ice cream every night. That's a quick way to shorter lifespan.
We're not trying to ruin everybody's joy.
No, not at all. Often when I give talks at dinners, people skip dessert after I've spoken. I feel bad about that.
Well, you remember we were talking about doing an experiment where we would have a conversation around a table with people and then have the servers come with like a birthday cake or something and just like watch them.
We still should do that. But yeah, so glucose is a bad one. Something else to avoid is super high protein because mTOR, it can be activated, but you don't want it activated all the time because it's not going to turn on the autophagy, the defenses to recycle proteins.
And this one is going to piss a lot of people off.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people who believe that carnivore diets are the best for longevity.
And for some people, a lot of aminos are appropriate.
Well, certainly if you're an athlete or you want to bulk up, there are short-term gains. You'll feel better if you eat meat. You'll obviously have the protein to build up that muscle. But we can go through the evidence. When you look at populations of what they eat and how long they live, as well as the short-term effects when you eat a high-protein, carnivorous, red meat-based diet, those changes will be good in the short run. But long-term, there's no evidence. In fact, I would say there's counter-evidence to that being beneficial for longevity if that's your goal.
And that's because of the inhibition of TOR.
In large part, yes. The sirtuins will also get switched off by high protein as well.
So aminos are important. We have to have them. If we don't have them, we die. But you can get aminos from plants as well as from animals.
Yeah, it's funny when I say I've gone vegetarian recently, which is a fact.
Where are you going to get your protein?
Yeah, where do you get protein from? Well, what do you think plant's made of? It's also mostly protein. Now, they're not as bioavailable, so you're getting like 2/3 the amount as you would from a steak.
The body has to work a little harder for it.
Great.
Yeah.
I want my body to work harder. It's good for it. It burns energy. And it's also activating these defenses, as we mentioned. So I'm now trying out this a full vegetarian diet. I'm not yet vegan, but that actually probably works even better for longevity, as the science will tell.
Let's talk about these primarily plant-based diets. There is vegan diets out there. You said like probably that's for many people, that's probably going to be the gold standard. But a lot of these plant-based diets have a little bit of meat in them. There's the Mediterranean diet. There's the Okinawan diet.
Lacto-ovo-vegetarianism.
Right, lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet. Is there anything you want to say about these, or can we talk about them as sort of an umbrella group? Do we call them like blue zone diets?
Yeah, well, let's talk about blue zones in a minute. I think what's interesting is that there was a really big study by the Adventist Health Group, 2013.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because what they calculated was the chance of dying based on various diets. And these were thousands of people. And what they found was that what's called the hazard ratio went down the more vegetarian and vegan you were. What does that mean? Your chance of dying goes down. And the number goes from 0 to 1. Whereas 1 is you're pretty likely to die tomorrow. Whereas a low number, which is around 80, means you've got 20% less chance of dying on any given day with this hazard ratio. So the numbers are the following. Non-vegetarians are at 1, if you call that 1. Compared to that, the next best one was semi-vegetarians at 0.92, and octo-ovo or lacto-ovo vegetarians 0.91. Okay, so about almost a 10% reduction in mortality, death. And then you get into vegans, which 0.85, so it's 15% reduction in death. And then the best one was pesco vegetarians, so getting a little bit of meat.
A little bit of fish.
Yeah, a little bit of meat from fish. Probably the fish oils in there are beneficial. And then you're down to 0.81, so that's a 19% reduction in your chance of death at any given day late in life.
Okay, now that's all cause mortality, but we can also now see this in biologic aging because we now have clocks that we can use to measure our biological age. And there are studies now also that are showing that these diets are effectively reducing biological aging as well.
Right, and there are a couple of these. There's a 1-year study looking at a diet of mostly vegetarian. But the one that I think's really exciting is one that just came out a couple of months ago that looked at mostly women on a Mediterranean diet plus exercise over 2 years. And they could now calculate what happens to your biological age over those 2 years, having switched the diet. And they had various recommendations. It's very typical Mediterranean. Limit alcohol. If you have red wine, that's fine. A little bit of fish. Only use olive oil as your fat. And focus mostly on plants. That was their lifestyle. And then exercise was walking and some other weightlifting.
That's the Fiorito study?
Yeah.
Okay, so the interesting thing about this study, at least to me, the thing that jumped out at me is it came out of Giovanna Masala's lab at the Cancer Institute in Italy. And like you go like, well, why do people whose primary responsibility is to study cancer care about aging? And it comes back to this thing that you've been saying all along, which is that if we can reduce people's biological aging, we can cut diseases off where they actually start.
Well, that's exactly right. That these diseases that we think are just diseases are mostly caused by aging itself, and that slowing down that clock by fasting or eating the right foods, Mediterranean diet, is now shown not just to slow down the ticking of the clock, but probably reverses your age as well. And that's a mind-blowing concept. You have to think about that for a minute, that it's possible by changing your diet to reverse your biological age.
But you believe pretty strongly, I'd say. And there is evidence, but I think it's still emerging and there needs to be more research. But this idea of xenohormesis, this idea of eating plants that have, not just eating a plant-based diet, but specifically focusing on plants that have experienced stress. Talk about that and why you are so focused on this idea.
Well, the xenohormesis concept, Conrad Howitz and I coined this term in the mid-2000s, trying to explain why so many plant molecules are good for us. It just cannot be a coincidence. And we came up with this idea really prompted by a 2003 Nature paper that we co-published that found that there were at least 20 plant molecules called polyphenols that activate the sirtuin enzyme called SIRT1, the number one out of the 7 family members. And when I looked into it, these polyphenols do remarkable things to the body. The one that got the most media attention because it's in red wine is resveratrol, but there's picetanol and there's fisetin and quercetin. These are supplements that people are getting excited about only now. But when you look into it, they activate and inhibit pathways or proteins in the body that are known to be important for health and longevity. And in some cases, the same molecule will inhibit one protein and activate another one in just the right way to promote health. That cannot be a coincidence. There's no way that that could just happen randomly. So the idea is that we've evolved mechanisms to sense when our food supply, the plants that we eat, are stressed.
Because it's like an early warning system?
Right. We're humans. We can see that the plants are wilting, and we know that the crops are dehydrated. We can measure the soil. Most organisms on the planet don't even have eyes. How would they know if their food supply is going to run out unless they sensed the stress, the fear in those foodstuffs? And so when you stress a plant, you get more resveratrol, you get more quercetin, positannol. And if you look at...
What kind of plants, we should say? I mean, it's not every plant that we're going to get those things in.
Of course, it's every plant.
It's every plant that
plants
gets
have sirtuin genes, and they need to survive just like we do. Mm-hmm. And they make these polyphenols in order to survive when they run out of, or running out of water and nutrients.
Okay, where are we going to get them most, though?
Or even preyed upon by caterpillars.
Yeah.
But in our food supply, a lot of plants have very few of these molecules. Why? Because we think that the faster they grow and the less stress that they have, the better. It's actually more profitable for a farmer to grow plants that grow really quickly and have no stress. But are they better for us? Absolutely not. So how do we know if a food has been stressed? Well, you can start with the generalization that if they're grown out in a field organically without pesticides, probably they're more stressed, right? But also there are foods that are intentionally stressed. Red wine is one. The best red wines are ones where the vines are dehydrated or have fungus growing on them. There's a good reason for that. We know that they taste better. Why? Because xenohermetic molecules are made along with molecules that taste good and are filled with color. It's the plant defenses. And so what I look for are plants that are organic, local, and colorful, because those are the ones that are most likely to have those molecules. In the case of red wine, choose grape varieties that are stress sensitive. Pinot Noir is one of the most sensitive, if not the most sensitive grape variety. And that's why it has the most resveratrol of any other type of wine.